Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. We got Julie, we got Aaron, we got Greg, we got Shaun. We got a show on toughness, and I am excited. Now, while I'm excited and explaining everything, you should be doing the things like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff. Get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for The Collective and Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all, put them up in the comment section. We can engage those throughout the show. Other than that, let's jump into some intros, and then we'll get right into the conversation. Julie, you're on top. Quick, 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff.
Hi there, I'm Julie Kelly. I'm a cycling coach, personal trainer, fitness instructor, and do some riding, endurance, mountain bike, mostly solo 24 hours.
Bam. Love it. Aaron, how about yourself?
Aaron Dale with Toronto Police, ex-Special Forces operator with CSOR, and now Toronto Police officer for the last 6 years, creator of the Military Veterans Wellness Program.
Bam. I love how the brevity of all this is awesome so far. Greg, how about yourself?
Greg Everett. I coach competitive Olympic weightlifters. I'm a retired weightlifter and just all-around nice guy and not as accomplished as these two.
All-around nice guy. That's a great way to describe yourself. I think that's a good way to go. Shaun, how's life out in the mountains?
Well, I'll describe myself as an all-around, not always nice guy. But maybe that's part of the whole toughness conversation that we'll have today.
I'm sure we'll get into it at some point. So, toughness. Let's dive right into the conversation. I'm going to ask you a very simple question, perhaps with some nuance. When you learned that toughness was the topic for the day, when you first started thinking about this, what were your first thoughts? What were the things that first bubbled up into your brain? Aaron, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
A lot of people ask me all the time while in different conversations, how do you become tough? How do you become resilient? And how can I pass special forces training? And how can I be an operator? And it's hard to answer that because there's no magic pill and there's no magic formula. There's tips and tricks, but it's a lifestyle. And it's kind of a lifestyle I started when I was a kid and pushing forward. So I think a lot of the toughness and a lot of resilience ends up being an entire lifestyle about how you live your life, and that feeds into having the right opportunity and then to go for the test to push yourself. And I think it's really an entire lifestyle choice than a magic pill, if that makes sense.
I like it. I like that description. Julie, what are your first thoughts?
Yeah, lots of thoughts for sure. I think for me, it was that it's a very complex topic. So there's lots of layers to it. So initially, my mind went to physical toughness, being a cycling coach and doing a lot of 24-hour solo races. A lot of it came to, what does it take physically to achieve or to complete those challenges. And a lot of that was okay, you prepare physically, that comes down to your training. So you're ready and you're confident, you have the skills, and you put the work in when it comes to an event or race day. But then on race day, it really shifts to the mental test, and it's going to be about, who wants it the most or who can rise above the challenges that will come forward on that day. So it's a two-part situation, but it really comes down to physical in the background, getting ready, and then mental on the day for whatever challenge it is that you're facing.
Ooh, I like the background foreground analogy. That's fantastic. Greg, what are your thoughts?
Honestly, I had no initial thoughts. I'm out here just kind of blowing bubbles, a little bit exhausted, but I'm excited. And I like what Aaron said in this idea that it is this complex, ongoing thing that is based so much on experience. And it's really this constitutional part of you, right? And the word I might hate more than anything on the internet for the past 20 years is hack. Right? The video, here's the hack to toughness or whatever it is. There's no such things as hacks. There's things you do or there's things you don't do. There's ways you think and behave and guide emotions and things like that. they're not hacks. And to be honest, if you are looking for a hack in particular for something like toughness, you're already losing that game. Like it's not going to work for you that way. And so recognizing that it is not just a long ongoing process, but a lifetime process of development, and learning and understanding and refinement and all these different things, and gaining experience that allows you to do those things. I think that retools your approach completely, and you will never be searching for, as Aaron said, the magic pill or the hack or whatever it is you want to call it.
Yeah, I heard something on the internet a little while ago. It was the magic pill is, or the easy road is the hard road. That is the easy road. John, what are your first thoughts on this?
Well, like, when I was a kid, there was this thing called the Cracker Jack box, and it had the caramel popcorn in it, and you would dig into it and you'd try to find your little gift, your little surprise, your little toy. Sometimes it was a tiny little horse, sometimes it was a tiny little race car, whatever it was, some little plastic thing from the Cracker Jack box. Well, that ain't toughness. You'll never find toughness in a Cracker Jack box. The idea that you can, as Greg said, tip, trick, and hack your way through to becoming tough, that's never going to happen. And like Aaron said, I believe it is a lifetime journey of it's who you are, or who you become, more correctly. And like Julie said, it is something that has to be tested in the fiery depths of hell sometimes, depending on what you're choosing to test yourself in. And so, toughness, from my perspective, as I stated in the green room quickly before we came into this conversation, I'm looking forward to this conversation because the guests understand what toughness is, because they've lived it long enough through practical experience to better understand the refined version of the sting. A lot of people talk about how to become tough, or you're tough, how do I become tough? But very few people are ready for the sting, the hurt, the cost, the price, the fire that you've got to absorb in order to become tough. You are forged. You don't tumble out of a Cracker Jack box to become tough. It is a multi-year process that never lets up and produces something that is never going to be acceptable for you if you are seeking real toughness. So it's a lifelong pursuit that is harsh and is full of hardship, but you'll only pursue it if you feel that it's worth it. So to my point, you'll never pursue toughness unless you make it important enough to become tough. And that requires a very strong why. So as I look at the three guests, each one of them, I can easily identify how they became tough, because their why is what got them to here. And so the why of the matter for me is in front of how to become tough.
Hmm. I love the fact you bring it back to the why. I think that's such a great place to start. But I want to engage this from a little bit. I'm going back in time on this one. So, Aaron, you had said, this is it's a lifestyle. It's a choice that you made at an early age. But I'm wondering, from everybody here, has your definition of toughness changed over the years? Like, from when you were a kid, what you saw as tough to what you look at now as general toughness, has that shifted at all, or has it been the same throughout? Aaron, I'm gonna come to you. What do you think?
I think my experience throughout my life from the beginning, I was in martial arts as a kid. I had a lot of good family support. I got into grappling, a lot of fitness events, long distance stuff. And the toughness I always had in that domain when I was younger was always a physical one. And it was very easy for me to be mentally tough. And then I find as you get a little bit older, it becomes a little bit more challenging to become mentally. You need to rely on being mentally stronger because physically things are a little bit harder. So I think it changed a little bit for me, but everybody can challenge themselves in tough stuff. For me, like the hardest thing I did was selection. And you can really tell the people that are talkers and the people that are doers before selection, and then when you see what happens on selection. But the one thing that I wanted to highlight was that they take a group of us, they stress us out completely and see who's left. And then once they find those people that are left, then they just take that entire group and keep on stressing them out and keep on pushing them and keep on challenging them until that entire group just gets stronger and stronger as a team. So it really is like your decisions and your upbringing. But for me, the whole toughness argument, I found very easy to be physically tough the younger I was, and it was also very easy to be mentally tough. And then the older I get, I really had to like start understanding some of the little mental tactics to get the edge on people and really take my training a little bit closer and not careless just with age. But that's my initial thoughts on that question, Chance.
I'm loving where this is going so far. Julie, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I like what Aaron said. There's the talkers, and you see that racing at the start line or even on social media or whatever the case may be. The talkers or the doers, those that are talking it up or those that are actually executing on race day. So there's definitely an element to that. But back to your question, I think for me, to be honest, I don't remember even thinking about toughness when I was young. I wasn't that active of a child. I got a little bit into gymnastics, but stepped away from that a little bit because it was getting a little bit too competitive for me at that stage. And I wasn't interested in putting in the work at that time for what was required to get to the next level. So I think for me, it wasn't until I was older in life that I started to think about toughness, when I started to get into racing and see the people around me and understand what toughness was from a racing perspective. But then it also shifted in the last couple of years for me too, more for not just what is physical toughness, but mental toughness. So for me as a coach now, thinking, how can I help my athletes be mentally tough on race day and in training, as well as physically tough?
I like it. I like it. Greg, any thoughts on this?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, like for most people, my very vague ideas of toughness as a kid were kind of shaped by the cultural archetypes, right? And so for my generation as a young boy, that's basically Schwarzenegger and Predator. That's kind of the model of toughness that American boys grow up with. Changing slightly generation to generation, but that's pretty rock solid throughout the generations that I'm aware of. But I say vague because I remember always, from a very young age, kind of seeing that as this common definition of toughness, but at the same time understanding that there was a collection of problems with that definition, right? Like it wasn't quite right. And I obviously at 11 years old or whatever, you don't have the ability to really get that intellectual and kind of articulate your thoughts on it and get to the bottom of it. But you can recognize that there's something that doesn't quite fit. And so, it took me a lot of years and a lot of tough experiences and, a lot of intentionally trying to work my way through this from an intellectual side as well as the physical, emotional, whatever, to understand what exactly it was that was missing for me, and how it would be achievable by me or by anyone, and kind of trying to create a process of sorts. Not too academic, Shaun, don't worry. But find how do we communicate these ideas? How do we find these ideas that can be applied universally to people? Like it's not just this is toughness for men, this is toughness for women, this is toughness for boys under age 12, whatever. What are these universal kind of tenets and the processes that we use to achieve them and kind of nurture them? Because I grew up a short, skinny kid, and so I always had that kind of insecurity hanging over my head and everything I did. So I think I had that extra compulsion to prove myself. And so that was a big part of it as a young person. And this carries on to most people's adult lives too, is that their ideas of toughness, along with many other things, are oriented toward other people's perspective, right? So I am tough because other people view me as tough, rather than these more internal perspectives of what does this mean for me and my life and my experience through life. And I mean, that's a whole nother subtopic here, so I won't keep going down that road, but that's my introduction.
Yeah, no, I love it. This is I have questions specifically on that later on, so don't worry, we're gonna get there. Yeah. Aaron, what do you got?
All right, I'd like to pile on this a little bit. The toughest people in my eyes right now, at the age I am after my experience, are the people that can recognize they have a problem, can ask for help, can then receive help, and then get back into the fight or back into their career or back into the fray. And I look at those people and I'm like, man, you guys are in gals, you're confident, you're not afraid of the stigma, you're not afraid of an injury, and you're not afraid of getting help, and then you're not afraid of getting back into the battle and getting your wounds, mental or physical, cleaned up, and then getting back into the fight. And when I sit back, I'm like, thank God I don't have a crazy I don't want to say disability, but a crazy challenge like that, like seeing your partner get killed or something like that. But the people that experience that raise their hand, ask for help, get help, and then fire right back into their platoon or their police unit, and they're right back into it. And they say, yeah, I had a problem, I fixed it, and I'm back here doing the job. I admire those people. And I think in today's age, in my personal experience, they're the toughest ones out there.
I could not agree more, man. That when you first, I think, get into advocacy and you see more and more people that do that specifically, like they get hit with some of the hardest challenges, and they just tuck their head down and like, all right, let's get at it, and and they work through the process and come right back at it. They are inspirations for sure. Shaun, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I do. I'm going to loosely term that, Aaron, and I know this is a poor choice of words, but I'll call it pulling for the underdog, or, betting on the underdog, hoping the underdog gets ahead. And so that kind of works for me because, like Greg stated, when he was a kid, he was probably a lot shorter and smaller than he is right now. And so, that's can be a struggle. Myself, before I joined the military, I was 135 pounds. I was skinny, underperforming kid. I didn't think I was that smart. I didn't think I was that good at anything. And like Greg, I felt compelled to not prove myself, but maybe prove myself to myself rather than prove it to everyone else. And so I just wanted to kind of meet a standard that I didn't even understand at that point. But as I've stated before, when I joined the military, it kind of squared me away, taught me how to do things the way that worked for me. And, I went on to become a whopping 170 pounds and less underperforming. And so I was an underdog in my mind before I joined the military. And then the military made me something other than an underdog. But it's only a lot of years later, after leaving the military, that I look back and thought, yeah, I was skinny and I wasn't much to look at, but I did have some things going for me. I used to go every day out into the bush by myself, didn't matter what season it was, up in the Rocky Mountains of Alberta, and hunting fish by myself as a kid. That was teaching me some strong mental skills, strong emotional skills. Even though, again, I was skinny, I was developing toughness in other areas that I didn't understand at the time. And I didn't understand it until decades later, looking back on it. And honestly, a person who made me think about this was Travis Bader, who's been on the podcast before from Silvercore Podcast. And he asked me a specific question offline in respect to, hey, Shaun, when you were a kid hunting, do you think that hunting taught you ... And until he threw that question at me, I'd never really thought about it. It was just part of my life that I hadn't deeply dug into in respect to. Did hunting and fishing as a kid set me up for special operations? Well, I think it did. I think all things set us up for all things. But we only understand that if we sit back, scratch our head, and think about, well, what thing set me up for that thing? And just simply living life, punching forward and never looking backwards and connecting the dots on how you can do it better in the present and the future is a loss. And so I love a good underdog story. And I think everyone does. But I think more important in an underdog story is connecting the dots as to how they went from underdog to almost hero's journey through the details of the understanding of the process.
I think this, at least in my mind, it's similar to, as you said earlier, it's the forge, right? You need some sort of forge in order to temper toughness throughout your body. I mean, you can't, if you take iron ore itself, it's strong, but in order to make it stronger, you have to put it through the forge. You have to put it through a refining process, and I think that's part of what we're getting at here. I just have a couple comments here I want to touch on, and then we're going to keep going here. Mitch jumped in here earlier and he said, racing this weekend with the EMRA, my 7th through 10th this year. At 65, I am a rarity on the track. Am I tough? No. But I work at it here and still on the mats 3 years going, which is always awesome to see. I love seeing your pictures there, Mitch, when you throw up your you and your gi. It's awesome. Glenn put in this really interesting question. Is toughness something that should be turned on and off with certain situations? Or is it a constant in life? And we're going to come right back to this. I'm just going to hit this last comment and then we're going to come back. John Minari jumps in here. Morning, troops. You can train to be tougher, but I believe some people have it in their DNA. Toughness is both mental and physical components. Toughness is measured by your ability to endeavor through, which I absolutely agree with. So I want to go back to this question, though. Is toughness something that should be turned on and off with specific situations? Or in my mind, I think toughness is something that needs to be gauged rather than on off, but I think that's part of it. What do you guys think? I'm going to come to Greg first. What do you got? You got to unmute yourself though first. I'll come back to you. Julie, what are your thoughts?
I think that's an interesting question. I think it's something that should be constant, but perhaps it's more how it's displayed. So there's certain situations where maybe the toughness, so to speak, should be dialed down or dialed up. So I think it depends on who you're in front of and the situation. So that would be my initial thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Greg, I'm going to come back to you. Got it working yet? No? Okay. Aaron, we'll hit you up next. What do you think?
I definitely think toughness should be turned on and off. And this is why. It doesn't, you still need to analyze what's going on. You still need to be smart about what's going on. And you got to choose when you need to be tough and when you need to possibly take a knee and possibly ask for help and possibly reset your sights and reattack the problem from another angle. So a lot of people in my old community, they would crash and burn because they were tough and they kept on driving to be tough, but they didn't realize the wheels were falling off. And I think through peer support, friendship, community, taking care of each other, it's important to remind some of the warfighters that you work alongside, like, hey, you're super tough, but let's try not to be that tough right now. Let's go and get retooled, refixed, reset, take a break, and then you come back and be tougher than before and perform better. So I think, yeah, you do need to turn it on and off, and you need to always reassess why you're being tough and if there's a better way to do it or a smarter way to do it. And I'm curious to hear Shaun, because I think you might have some similar experiences in your old world as I did in mine when it came to that.
I'm digging it. Shaun, what are you thinking?
I think I do, and I think we all do, and everyone on the guest panel, I'm sure, has faced this as well. Anyone who is a hard charger, anyone who's in the fire on a semi-regular basis, has got to think about this question deeply. And I'm gonna take a little bit of a different tact to it, and say that I don't believe it should be an on and off switch. What it should be is a slider switch. So a slider as in you can dim the lights or you can turn the lights up rather than an on and off light switch. And so the state, the operating state of the slider switch, whether it's 60% or 80%, 100%, 10%, that's just the simple calibration to the moment. So that toughness that you're going to portray is one thing, but that toughness that you're going to be is a different thing. So there's two different slider states there. Your projection out into the external world and your understanding of toughness in your internal world. And so the dissonance between those two states is a person who feels that everything's coming apart on the inside might be projecting externally that everything is good to go and they're tougher than tough. But that dissonance between the internal world and external world can create a big problem, of course. So if you're projecting 100% tough out into the world and you feel 0% tough inside, that's a problem. If we nuance that and say projection of 60% tough out into the moment and you're feeling 40% tough inside, well, there's dissonance, but less so than trying to do it 100% externally and 0% internally. So again, there's a nuanced or a sliding scale factor when it comes to toughness, turning it on or turning it off. Certain situations, we are, whether we like it or not, sometimes supposed to represent what toughness means in the moment for those around us, just to stabilize the moment, stabilize the environment, the chaos of it. If everyone looks to you and expects a solution through a projected toughness, well, sometimes we have to manufacture it artificially as an external representation just to help everyone around you feel like we've got this as a group, even though internally you might not feel like you're the toughest person for the job at that moment. So again, I think it's a modulated or a slider scale rather than an on-off switch. And to Aaron's point, I don't think it can ever be a constant. I don't think, for myself as an example, before I joined the military, whether I was tough or not is neither here nor there. At some point, I was convinced by the system that I'm actually pretty tough. And so once you have that realization, or once I had that realization, I didn't lock it into my mind's eye as to, that's it, I'm tough forever now. And no matter what happens, no matter how much in the hurt locker I am internally, I'm always going to be tough, 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 tough. I don't think it can be a constant. Like life ebbs and flows, I believe our toughness has to ebb and flow. Not our sense of our belief that we're tough, but our execution or deployment in the moment of what it means to be tough. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm tracking on that. I think one of the interesting thoughts that clicked into my head was that as Aaron was describing his example, I was thinking that those people that can raise their hand and say, I'm not doing well right now, those are the toughest people in my mind. Like, you have to engage a mental toughness in order to do that, while disengaging from a bit of a physical toughness is the cracking the outer shell. So I'm loving where this is going. Greg, you got any thoughts on
All
this?
right. Sorry, my computer is not very tough. Yeah, I'm going to respectfully sort of disagree with at least what I heard before I had to run away for a moment and reboot. I don't think it's something that needs to be turned on and off, because I think that is assuming that toughness is one very specific manner of behavior or thinking. And I don't believe that to be the case. In other words, to me, part of true toughness is that psychological and emotional flexibility and the ability to modulate what you're doing and how to be appropriate for the situation. So again, just as Chance said, Aaron's example of, people we look at as being tough, as in this classic notion of they are impervious to imperturbable, and nothing gets to them. There's just these like solid, stoic faced guys who sit on the edge of their tightly made bed and stare at a blank wall instead of watching TV and relaxing. They are the kind of people, though, that can make it through extremely difficult, challenging situations, have struggles, but at the same time recognize those struggles and their need for help, or their need to adapt and change the way they are doing things in order to recover, get better, improve, whatever. That is all part and parcel of what true toughness actually is. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that men in particular have, is, again, this archetype of toughness, which is, if there's a problem, I will just shoot it and then move on to the next one, right? It's not, it's like this unwillingness to recognize that emotion and intellectual approaches are part of being tough, not things that need to be shut out in order to achieve toughness. And forgive me if that was a bit incoherent. I'm all in a fizz after having to reset my computer.
I love it though. I don't think
tough.
I don't think I've heard many people use the term imperturbable before. So I give you credit on that one. That was excellent. And I'm wondering specifically, do you think maybe that idea has changed like recently? Because I mean, we've seen a lot of shifting in the military. We've seen a lot of shifting in the police world, the fire world, the first responder realm, in that more people are speaking up. The stigma is starting to come down. People are being much more open with the the mental and the emotional side of this. Do you think that is actually shifting, or do you think it's just the fact that we can talk to each other now versus prior in previous years where we didn't have the internet? Perhaps there were lots of people that were standing up and saying, "Hey, I need a break," then as well. We just didn't hear about it. What do you guys think? I'm going to come back to you, Greg. What do you think?
Okay, thank you. It's an interesting question, and I think that there is definitely movement in the right direction, in that there are more and more individuals and organizations who are providing the kind of help you're talking about, whether it's military, law enforcement, whatever, kind of PTSD counseling, helping people get past the stigma, which never should have been there in the first place. But kind of going back to what I said previously, I think part of the remaining problem is this idea that's lingering, that it's not like, oh, well, you are a tough person and this is part of your journey as a tough person. And instead, it's kind of like, oh, it's okay for you to stop being tough right now and be vulnerable in order to get help. It's like, well, no, but that kind of emotional vulnerability and willingness, I think, is, again, part of true toughness. And so what I would like to see is, again, these things happening, but to not, it's almost like this condescending sort of pat on the head to a child, where it's like, oh, it's okay. It's okay to cry sometimes. And then secretly you're like, this kid's being a wimp. That to me is totally inappropriate, and it's inaccurate. And it's misrepresentative of what toughness is. And I think it's doing a disservice to the same people you're trying to help, in that it's almost like you're telling them it's okay, but at the same time sort of saying it's okay, but it's not that okay. But for now, it's okay for a little while, and then we'll get you back out there, big guy. And so that's what I don't like to see. And I'm not saying that's true across the board by any means. But I'm saying that there's a bit of that lingering in my experience. And that's what I would really like to see change, is that's part of that stigma. Is that it's not okay just for now, for a little while. It's always okay. That's part of the human experience, and it doesn't negate toughness or diminish it in any way.
Yeah, I'm 100% agreement with that one. Julie, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, back to your question. I mean, it's hard to say in terms of whether people are speaking out more than they were in the past because it's hard to measure, if there was no social media or things were speaking out prior to that. But I think I think it has improved. You do see more and more people speaking out. When I think about sport, for me, something that comes to mind is red, so relevant energy disorder in sport, basically underfueling for the work required, the energy that you're expending in whatever sport it is that you're doing. And I think that definitely is more people are speaking out about it. And there's also more resources for people to access or feel comfortable speaking out. So I think there has been a shift when I look at it from that lens, whether it's just an avenue that people have somewhere to go. But I think people are getting more on board and feeling more comfortable talking about these things. There's some things that came out from the Olympics. One of the female rugby players, I know she spoke out about it. There's been some riders in the Tour de France that have talked about that, and that in the past some of them were totally under fueling, and carbs are bad and that kind of thing. And now they're all starting to speak out and even go back and say, man, like, I can't believe the way we used to fuel some of these rides. So I think it has improved, and the more people come out and speak about issues, the more other people then feel comfortable to speak out as well. I think in terms of just getting comfortable, then putting yourself out there.
Yeah, this last Olympics especially, there's been a lot of athletes coming forward with a number of uh, issues that they've been managing throughout. Aaron, you got any thoughts on any of this? You got to unmute yourself though.
Yeah, sorry. I
There
think
we
they're
go.
starting to recognize it more and more in professional sports, and they're trying to implement a peer support program in the NHL right now, and they're trying to have seasoned players mentor more junior players to help endure the stress of the game. Uh, pre selection and pre like challenge and pre toughness, one thing that I like recommend to everybody is a books by Jack Dallier called Performance Thinking, and that was a very like logical based approach to toughness and performing at your best, and that helped me tremendously. Is kind of like a thought process and a bit of a skill set to actually being tough and essentially being mentally tough, more so than kind of just hearing a person say don't quit. But that would be my 2 cents, is Performance Thinking by Jack Dallier.
I'm gonna write that down. Keep it for later. Sean, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I think that the understanding of the word toughness is changing. And I think one of the reasons that it's changing is because of the internet, and not always in a healthy way. So, as an example, the book that Aaron just listed off, perhaps later today, someone will grab that at the public library, start reading it, get halfway through it, form a loosely based opinion on what they believe toughness then means, get in front of their phone and talk about what toughness means. And then, depending on the traction on that, now we've got a layman, we'll call it loosely, halfway into a book, forming an opinion, throwing it out there to the internet. Depending on how many of their friends listen, they can then start conflating that idea into, now the definition of toughness is a half-baked opinion created over a half an hour or so, and then spit out to all their friends. Therein lies the problem with toughness in all subjects that are related to the internet. And that's why when someone gets in front of a microphone and starts talking about toughness, I look at their backstory, their background, and how they have put the rubber to the road, the pedal to the metal, as it were. So, using Greg as the example, Greg has been in the game a long time, not just half a day of reading a book. And so his backstory, his body of work supports his opinion to some degree on what toughness means. I know that he's done the iterative, intellectual, physical, emotional, mental struggles on this subject over a long, long period of time. It's not just a one and done idea. It's a 1,000 and still not done idea for Greg. And so all of us on this panel have iteratively observed toughness in our lives, and maybe more importantly, because that's the lives we've lived, we've been surrounded by people who have also lived the life of toughness. And so we get to observe ourselves, but because we're in the game, hard and long, we're surrounded by people who are also in it as well. So we get to look at ourselves, we get to look at the external world that surrounds us, our peers, as the model to better understand who's who in the zoo and what does this all mean. And so, again, going back to an academic opinion, if you're observing toughness through the laboratory, through an electron microscope, and simply understanding it impassionately, I'll call it, then the definition of toughness is only as solid as the type of pen that you use to write it on the paper. If you're not living it and testing your sense of what toughness means, then it's all for naught. So I believe that toughness is changing. It is magnified through voices on the internet, but we all have to be extremely careful as to our understanding of what those voices understand about toughness.
So I guess really it's about intentionally seeking toughness rather than intentionally seeking to talk about toughness. And I think that's one of the things we've talked about many times on the show and we said it earlier today, is there's the talkers and the doers, right? So I want to shift gears just a little bit, but I want to keep this in line with what we're talking about, because we keep going back and forth between like physical and mental toughness. And I'm wondering, is there a difference? Is there a separation between physical and mental toughness, or is it basically the same principle that you're using, just doing something physical versus doing something emotional? What do you guys think? Julie, I'm going to hit you first on this one.
Well, this is just going back to what I said at the beginning of the show when you asked me my thoughts were. I mean, I think they are, you can't separate them per se, but they are separate in a way. They relate to one another, but you have to look at both aspects. So again, when I spoke at the beginning of the show, I was talking about from a training perspective, or from if you're a cyclist and you're getting ready for a race. So you've got the physical aspect, and to me, a lot of that is getting ready for your race or whatever it is that you're going to do that's requires some toughness. So all of that is the back end, the training, putting in the hard miles, maybe riding in poor weather, under fuel, dehydrated, all these things, mechanical things that maybe you'll face in the race, but you've tested and you feel confident, but you're physically prepared. You've done the work, you've put in the hours, the saddle time. So that's the one aspect. And to me, that's sort of the work per se. But then on the day of the event or whatever it is that you're facing, then I feel like the mental part of it takes more of a priority. You've got all that in the bag, so to speak, from the physical aspect of you've prepared. But then the mental toughness piece is what's going to get you through the day or the event when these challenges arise, and that are you going to be able to be tough enough to overcome those challenges that you're faced with.
Yeah, I think Shaun has said this many times too, is that it's 90% mental and 10% mental, something like that. Greg, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I was laughing at what Shaun said, because I say that in weightlifting a lot. Is weightlifting is 100% mental if you have 100% of the necessary physical ability. So if you can kind of distinguish physical, mental, emotional toughness in a lot of aspects, but ultimately they are all interconnected and interdependent. And the body is basically the vehicle for the mind, right? And the mind is largely directed by emotion, which are, kind of the primal physical intellect of the body, I guess you could look at it. So you have to have all three of those things working together, the full meal deal. But you can have people who are much better at exercising one or the other. For example, a lot of athletes are very good at demonstrating what we would consider physical toughness. They can put their heads down and plow through these incredible events, like you two on here, the 24-hour mountain bike kind of stuff. I don't want to do that. Could I force myself to? Maybe, but that's not something I'm good at doing, right? So you guys have that the physical toughness to do something like that. And other people may have it, but they don't have the mental or emotional aspects that need to accompany it to make it happen, right? And so you may have someone who is very tough in the sense that they have withstood incredible, emotional trauma, abuse, all these horrific experiences, but you ask them to do some physically difficult labor and they crumble, right? So you can certainly be better at one or the other, but ultimately, again, toughness as a whole to me is all three of those things working together. You don't necessarily have to be perfectly equal at all of them, but they should all be developing hand in hand because they are all totally related. There was something else I was going to add and I've forgotten, so please let me mute myself and move on.
No worries. Just put your hand up if you want to jump back in.
Yeah.
Aaron, what do you got? What are you thinking?
I'm thinking there's always a lot to take from other people when it comes to lived experiences, but you can't take only lived experiences and you can't take only academics. But I think you really need to take both, especially in the human performance realm. But yeah, I like the conversation, but that was the one thing that really stuck out in my mind.
I like it. Shaun, any thoughts?
Yeah, like Aaron just said, I do believe that there's many facets to toughness, and even when we're simply talking about physical, mental, and emotional toughness, the overlayer of academics, intellectually understanding what those things mean. I've got several books. I'm actually looking at Dr. Mark Bubb's book on my bookshelf right now called Peak, the New Science of Athletic Performance, that blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, it's our job to not just do, it's our job to think. It's our job to connect those two states, doing and thinking. And if you're not much of a thinker, then get around people who are thinkers. If you're not much of a doer, then get around people who are doers. If you can get around people who are thinkers and doers, then congratulations, you're in the right room. That's the kind of room that will inspire you to pursue your greatness. So I don't believe that there's a difference between physical toughness and mental toughness. I just believe that there is a state of existence in that moment that you're required to deploy based on the circumstances that's challenging you. So if you're stepping up to the Olympic bar and you're about to do the mega lift, well, yeah, you've got to be physically tough, but at the same time, in the same moment, you've got to be mentally and emotionally tough. And so this is going to be a question to Greg, because this will help us maybe expand my curiosity on this subject. When someone steps up for the world championship and they're grabbing that bar, they've got all the chalk on, they've got their feet all squared away, and they're about to do the mega lift. Do you think, Greg, that in that moment you can simultaneously focus your physical, mental, and emotional toughness into the trifecta all at the same time in one big namaste moment? Can you do it all simultaneously? Or do you think that it is an operating state that we switch from millisecond to millisecond based on, as someone grabs that bar, they're thinking, man, I've got to be emotionally strong. And then it switches to, and how I'm going to do that is, and then it switches to et cetera, et cetera. Do you think it's a combined state, or do you think it's an individual state that switches rapidly to stay focused on whatever is required for the outcome?
That's a heck of a
It's
question.
an interesting
Give her-
question. I would say that it is a simultaneous, it is a state of being when those things are all functioning together. And that is, I think we see that happen in these ultimate performances, whether that's athletics, whether it's combat, whether it's survival, where you have, and I'm blanking on the guy's name, the guy who wrote Flow. It's that same idea where it's not something that you are intellectualizing or working through a logical process in the moment, because that would remove you from that flow state. Your conscious mind cannot operate fast enough to be directing the kind of activity we're talking about in that moment. You take a snatch. That lift is 1 second from floor to overhead at most. There is not time to be considering and adjusting your emotional and mental state, as well as directing physical motion in that time. That is the culmination of typically years of training all three of those things, right? When you are approaching a lift like that, you are not thinking of what you're doing physically, right? You're not thinking, okay, I'm going to, push my feet into the floor, and then once the bar is past my knees, I'm going to make sure I'm bringing it back toward myself as I extend my hips powerfully and continue pushing through the ground, blah, blah, blah. You can't do it. What you are thinking is you are intentionally focusing yourself on what the one most critical thing for you in that moment is. And typically, at that high level, it's more related to creating a state of confidence, that the so-called suspension of disbelief, also known as belief, right? Where you are 100% confident in your ability to execute this thing that you are about to attempt. Because if you don't truly have that belief, you will not do it. And that goes back to the tie between that mental, emotional, and physical toughness. You can have the physical ability to execute something like a world record snatch, but if the mental and emotional aspects are not there to support it, it won't happen. And I've seen it over and over again with athletes I've coached and with other athletes I've known. You can have the most physically talented people in the world, and they will never amount to anything as athletes because they are incapable of handling those other elements that are required to make it work. So yes, to get back to your question, I do think that is a simultaneous state, a condition of being in that moment, and it is very ephemeral. It's not something you can sustain for a long period of time. Csikszentmihalyi, that's the guy who wrote the Flow book. He talks about these longer kind of flow states, and you think about that like, as a surfer, or I've even heard it described for baseball players. To me, that's kind of pushing the idea of flow, because it's such a long duration, and there are so many disruptions and changes in the environment, the atmosphere, whatever, that are going to be involved. I think that truest flow state is those momentary experiences of whether it's a quick intuitive decision, whether it's a very quick motion like an Olympic lift, or whatever the case is. That is the ultimate combination of those things functioning together. And then you have different kind of variants of that experience for longer durations, different experiences, things that are more physical or more mental or more emotional, whatever. Again, please stop me here, Chance.
I will one of these days. I like the way you eloquate what it is, your ideas. It's awesome. It really reminded me of, jiu-jitsu, especially. You can get into a flow state and start moving around. But I wanted to ask specifically Aaron and Julie here, when you're talking either critical incidents out on the street, you're dealing with, the worst day of somebody else's life, and you're having to engage it immediately. Is it a process, a mental process, like Shaun was saying, where you go, okay, now I got to do this, then I got to do that, then I do this, or are you just like kind of dropping into the tools that you have, and you're like, okay, now we're going to work through this. And similarly, Julie, I imagine going through highly technical positions on a racetrack when you're already tired and already exhausted, you're not really mentally conscious of those decisions. You're just working off the tools you have. I want to get your guys' thoughts on this. Aaron, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll hit Julie on this one. What do you think?
I think you raise a good point because all of us have shown some sort of toughness and some sort of resiliency in our own domains, right? But we haven't had to be challenged in another area that's foreign to us. And when you bring up like a critical incident, like I've never been, I don't know, lost a family member, had a kid hit by a car, and that's an event that I haven't dealt with. And that's something that a police officer deals with all the time. And the police officer, the biggest thing they can do is just to provide empathy and then connect people to those appropriate resources. But I think a bigger question is how does a lot of people have obstacles in their lives that they hit. Some people get stronger when they work through those obstacles, and some people break down when they hit those obstacles. But if you're looking for advice on how to be tough or how to work through a problem, the how do you do that as a person that might not be a soft guy or a biker or a weightlifter, but they're trying to look for different tactics that we all use in our domains and apply them to their own personal life? And in policing, the biggest thing to help a person do that is providing empathy and then trying to influence their behavior to give good advice to connect to the right services so they can work through those problems. But yeah, that I think is where the question is. How does a person take toughness tools and toughness ideas from everybody else and apply them to that one scenario that will be that obstacle in front of them that they can't easily overcome? So for example, I'm good at certain things, but what if I hit an obstacle in another area? How do I be tough for that? Those are kind of my ideas around that one. But empathy from a police officer's perspective is the big one for that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is it's such a fascinating topic, and I love the fact that we can. There's like 6 or 7 rabbit holes sitting in front of us, going like, where do we go next? Julie, what are your thoughts on this?
I'd like to go back a little bit to Shaun's question when he asked Greg about the 3 elements and whether they were intertwined or separate, and then I'll touch on sort of your last question, and it'll kind of lead into it. But I think, I mean, doing a snatch is very different, of course, from a time frame perspective to a 24-hour race. In terms of, you can't be in a flow state, so to speak, for 24 hours. I don't think, at least I don't, I've never been in it or know anyone that has been. So for me, I think they're intertwined. Um, but, the spotlight shifts in that duration. So, for example, the physical toughness piece, maybe just physically being able to ride for that duration, or chasing someone down when it means, it's the last lap and you're going for the win or a podium spot. You've got to rely on that physical aspect, but the mental piece may come through. Again, those hard times, if it's bad weather, dehydration, any kind of emotional thing, you're going to have to rely on your mental state, that you've done the work, you're confident in the training. And then the emotional aspect, the spotlight may change there. If you have a mechanical, emotionally, you're going to have to be able to stay calm, focused, figure out what you have to do to fix whatever the mechanical is and get back on the bike. So I think the spotlight shifts in that long of a duration. And it's, sometimes you may get lucky, and there'll be times that you will have that flow state where all of those 3 pieces of toughness are firing. But to answer your question on the piece you mentioned about sort of how do you stay focused, or what happens if you're in a technical terrain and you're fatigued and that kind of thing, for me, you're looking at all your lines. So in the day you're practicing, and you're looking at your lines. So when you're fatigued, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. You're not going to probably be riding quite as smooth as you did at the beginning of the race, but you've already identified what your lines are and the speed that you're going to go into these descents or corners, so that when you're fatigued, you're good to go. You're kind of on autopilot, so to speak, and the body and even the mind just sort of takes over, and you just somehow do your thing and get it done. If that answers your question, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. It very reminiscent of drilling something over and over and over to the point that you don't have to think about it. It just you can drop into it and go, which is I love this. Shaun, you got any thoughts?
Couple of
Thought I'd just be
things.
there for a second. So
Yeah, a couple of things based on what Julie just said, and she understands this as well as anyone. Any athlete that I ever worked with, every day they had a training session that they'd have to execute against, and every day they'd have to upload it to me, and every day I'd be analyzing it, and every day we'd be talking about whether it was good to go or not. And so I used to craft my training sessions with my athletes so that I was hitting all three states: psychological, emotional, and mental, physiological. And so any training session, there was always layers within the training session. And so if I was to ask Julie to go out for a 6-hour ride, it wasn't just, go out and do 6 hours and have a normative power value of ... and make sure that you're hitting ... It was always something buried in there that I knew was going to put the hurt locker on her mind, or put the hurt locker on her emotional state, or the hurt locker on a physiological state. And so as mentors, coaches, leaders, guiders, anyone that is around us, it's our job to think deeper than just one layer, than just today they're going to work on their emotional state. You've got to tie all three together in a nuanced way so that it is, to some degree, multifactorial. So that's my first thought is, if you're in a position where you are involved with someone and growing them as a person, you've got to fold some things in there, almost like Jedi mind trickery, to bolster up the other areas that they might not be aware that they're working on right now. And so, Chance, your other question, it was, sorry?
I was reiterating kind of what Greg was talking about in terms of, finding that flow state in those moments. And I
Right.
was likening it to, critical incidences for the police, or perhaps a really technical area while you're riding that you're not really, you're exhausted or whatever, you've been going for so long, and finding that flow state, being able to pull from those tools without having to actively pull from those tools. So I was
Right,
just wondering if
thanks.
you had any
Yeah.
experience with that.
Yeah, so on flow state, I didn't know that the topic today, I didn't learn that until just a few hours ago. And so yesterday, I kind of spoke about this, though I didn't know this is what we're going to be speaking about today. I put up a little video. I was out on my single speed. Over the last over a week now, I've been riding my single speed again. It's brutal, man. Brutal. It's so freaking hard. I'd forgotten how hard it was. And I'm right in the thick of it right now, eating all the pain sandwiches. And there's no crusts cut off of these pain sandwiches. I'm choking on them. It's actually scratching my throat every time I eat one. And so I was out on my bike and I shot a little video and I was talking about the flow mode, the flow state that I used to be able to drop into when I was on my single speed, because I've got thousands and thousands of hours on that single speed, but I'd just taken a couple of years off from it to start riding an entirely different kind of bike that I was having a lot of fun on. But now that I'm back into the pain sandwiches again with the single speed, what I said in my video yesterday was this: I need to be incredibly fit and incredibly focused in order to drop into flow mode when I'm on this bike. And it's momentary flow mode. It isn't like I jump on my bike on my driveway and ride up into the mountains and then I get back home and it was all magnificent flow. Not at all. These are fleeting moments in a highly experienced rider who does tons of riding and could write a small chapter on flow for sure. But that doesn't mean that I'm in it all the time. These are just, they're moments that pass. And sometimes you only realize that the moment you were in a flow state and have moved out of is only visible to you sometimes when you think back on it later that day. Oh, yeah, right. I guess I was moving nicely. I wasn't aware that I was moving, and somehow I got from A to Z invisibly and did a freaking good job. Flow state is a really interesting thing. And as Greg said, there's entire books about it out there. But as I stated in my video last night, it's rare that you drop into flow mode. And to do it, you've got to have a body of work behind you that is bonkers. So in any call, any police call, any moment where there's a lot of chaos or stress or high performance requirements, you can't be the noob stepping up into the moment and thinking that you're dropping into flow mode to solve the problem in real time without awareness that you're solving it. That ain't you. It requires years sometimes, decades sometimes, to understand how to invisibly disappear in the moment and just solve things. And again, it's not a lifelong thing that you'll be able to do forever in a day, anytime you want. They're fleeting flow mode states. And so I'm not fit enough yet on my single speed. I've got the focus. I just don't have the fitness right now to flow mode on my single speed bike. And I think that we all need that lesson from time to time. The hardships that you've got to face to flow through tough moments requires a lot of work. You can't listen to this podcast and then later this afternoon go flowy McFlow something just because you heard us talk about it. They're ideas that have to be tested within your own life, like a crucible to some degree, in order to understand what does and doesn't work for you. And if you can hang on to the idea that flow state will only appear once you've done a lot of work.
I don't know about you, but I'm kind of a flow master. I'm just saying. Yeah. You bring up an interesting point, and it brings me to another question here. But those moments are also celebrated, right? When you see somebody, and I'm sure this is for everybody, when you see someone pull off what seems almost impossible, and they come out of it and they're like, yeah, I just was like, I was in it. I did the job. I think we came out of it and everything was good. Those moments are kind of celebrated. Everyone's like, yeah, man, that was awesome. Someone demonstrates a level of toughness that most people wouldn't be able to handle, and awesome, especially from the fields that we all come from. So I'm wondering, in those fields where toughness is celebrated, how do we ensure that compassion isn't lost, for lack of a better word? How do we, as Aaron was saying earlier, how do we maintain an empathy for someone whose level of toughness perhaps isn't where you are at the moment, or where the person who's being celebrated isn't at in the moment? I'm going to come to Greg first. What do you think?
Can I circle back real quick and then get to the compassion empathy part? Because something Aaron and Julie and Shaun all said, I want to tie it all back together in a neat little package here under the toughness banner. So Aaron's talking about, well, we can get extremely proficient and experienced in our specialty, right? Whether it's law enforcement, combat, mountain biking, whatever, maybe even weightlifting. But then when we're out of that specialty, we don't have the same proficiency, and therefore we are not able to, react intuitively and with the same composure and this and that. And I think the important thing to understand is, for me, part of what toughness is a large and continually growing collection of capabilities. And that includes the related experiences. And so the more of that you accumulate, the more varied experiences, and I think Shaun mentioned this earlier too, is getting out and experiencing life with all these different people. All of those things are what come together to create that growing capability and that growing body of experience. And that together is what creates that ability for you to then deal better and better with novel experiences, right? So you may not have ever encountered this specific event. But because of your years of varied experience, you have enough of a foundation of things that apply that you are able to then handle that far better than you would have ever been able to without those experiences outside of your narrow channel of specialization. And so I think that's absolutely critical. And I think it's a major mistake for people to not explore and experience things outside their specialty, whether it's a professional specialty or a recreational, slash sport specialty, whatever the case may be. And now I'm totally forgetting what Julie said that I was going to use the rehearsal part of it, right? She's talking about, she goes in there, she knows her lines before. Maybe as she's, in hour 21, she gets off a little bit because everyone's tired and they're losing focus and you don't have the same control, but you have a plan. And I think, you guys could speak to this too, coming from operator backgrounds, is you're going to go through training and rehearsals, whether it is a more general approach or a very specific operation. It's common to rehearse those things physically and mentally through visualization, through practice. You have a team of guys being able to run through some critical operation without having to stop every 2 seconds and check, make sure everybody's okay. We're all on step 3 here. Everyone know what they're doing on step 4. Get your cue, whatever. That's the sort of thing that you're doing by literally rehearsing things, but also, again, by accumulating these experiences, and those end up being rehearsals for future things that are unpredictable. And we talk about, oh, this guy's so intuitive, he just responded naturally. No, he didn't. He responded according to his, accumulated wisdom through experience and contemplation and practice. That's what intuition is, right? It's maybe you don't recognize it in the moment, but those are things you have collected over time. It's not some like innate thing that came from your DNA. Somehow your mom and dad's DNA combined to allow you to know how to handle an active shooter as a law enforcement officer. Like, that's not a thing. And then now, of course, I'm forgetting what Shaun said too. I'm all over the place today. In any case, my underlying point is that all of these things are part of what true toughness is in my mind, right? And it's not some like magical ability to maintain composure in a tough situation. It is part of it. And you're doing things like the rehearsals, gaining exposure, doing whether it's formal or informal stress inoculation training where you are exposing yourself to these difficult, challenging experiences and learning how to maintain your composure by, again, being more experienced, being more capable, being more aware of your emotional responses and how you can combat negative emotional responses spinning out of control, all these sorts of things. And that allows you to then exercise compassion and empathy when you are in situations that are extremely stressful and dire and critical, in which other people are running around, flailing and screaming and whatever, because you don't have to worry about all these other practical sides of it because of your experience. And you can focus more on that human side of it and be interacting with these other people like you are a person rather than some kind of like service machine that is just there to perform this practical duty, like, stop shooter, help person, relocate to hospital. It's this interaction. And Aaron has said this multiple times, is that's like, such a critical part of this is, how do you get that interpersonal relationship with someone so that they trust you, they know they can rely on you, and you can provide them the best possible service. So anyway, that's my extremely long-winded, circumlocuitous way of bringing that all together.
Bam. We'll just shut the show down. That was good to go. We can just right there. Aaron, you got any thoughts on any of that?
One of the best ways I learned about the concept of like flow state is the hierarchy of competence. So at the very bottom of the triangle, you have unconscious incompetence. So you don't know how bad you really are. And then you start having the next step, which is conscious incompetence. And you realize like where you are in the playing field and how much you have to learn. And you're still learning these skills. And then as you move higher, you're conscious and competent. And then you start becoming unconscious competence. And that's all done with good training. That's all done with experiences, and that's all done with good coach and good team and good mentorship and hitting these roadblocks that aren't too big. They'll stop you, and then through teamwork and coaching, you'll get over these obstacles. And it's setting up the obstacles so they start low and work their way high. And I think once you go through a process like that in whatever kind of domain you're in, it gives you tools to attack your life in other avenues. When you need to be tough in unique scenarios, you can pull on your the lessons learned from other areas of your life.
Yeah, I totally down with that one. Julie, you got any thoughts on this?
Well, I like what Greg was saying, just to build a little bit more on the rehearsal aspect. So I think whether it's in the event or not, I mean, for myself or for all the athletes, they are rehearsing on a daily basis. So whether they get a chance, hopefully they are going to get a chance at some stage to ride part of the course or see a little bit of it. But they're rehearsing for that leading up to the event. So they're riding similar terrain that what they'll be experiencing, whether it's similar technical terrain, whether it's the amount of vert gain or the hours they're going to be getting in that event. But then they're also, I might challenge them, as Shaun mentioned earlier, like you're testing them not just on the physical, but the emotional and the mental. Like maybe you're giving them a really hard workout at the end of the week to see if you can crack them, because those are the things that they're going to face in the event per se. So you're always testing them and seeing whether they can get through those training sessions physically, mentally, and emotionally. So it's all rehearsal leading up to the event. So I just wanted to build out on that, but I don't really remember what the initial question was from before that.
That's okay. We kind of went around and we didn't get to that. I'll come back to it later though. Shaun, you had some thoughts?
I do. Can you do me a favor and stand by to pull up that
Right.
image that I put up on Instagram? That'd be fantastic. So just to take things back a notch, not to reset us, but just to look at it maybe freshly again. Toughness, the word toughness. It comes from the Old English word to, which is over 1,000 years ago. And its meaning is strong, firm, or tenacious. And other Proto-Germanic and Indo-European related words reflected the constant theme of strength, resilience, and durability. So now we know what toughness means back in the day. And so now toughness today, in a simpler statement, other than all of the things that have already been said, I'm going to try to look at the word toughness from a different angle now for anyone out there who thinks differently. So I created a simple toughness equation. So it's a bit of math, but you don't have any homework. So a little bit of math for the moment. Chance, can you pull that up?
Yep.
And so I wrote down the equation as such. Toughness equals resilience plus endurance multiplied by determination. And so let's just break that down real quick. Super simple. Resilience and endurance sound similar, but they're not the same. So resilience is the ability to bounce back from adversity. Endurance is the ability to withstand hardship over time. And then determination, as part of the equation, is what acts as the multiplier, the force multiplier. And so resilience, as you see at the bottom of that page, it's about flexibility and adaptability. It is a short-term response to an acute challenge that requires a positive mindset and for you to reframe the negative moment. Whereas endurance is more about stamina and persistence, long-term sustainability in the challenges, and requires patience, consistency, and pacing. Because we all know that racing is pacing. And so if life is a race, then you've got to understand the phase of the race that you're in, what you want as an outcome within the race, and now how to pace yourself between the start line and the finish line, as it were. And the pace cannot be this 100% all the time. Nobody races a race that is a long race at 100% for the entire race. There are ebbs and flows. There is tactics and strategy. Like racing is like life. And so on the second page that I put up in my Instagram post, I talked about resilience strategies and endurance strategies, of which there are many that I listed. And so, again, resilience being the short term, endurance being the long term strategies. In the third page that I created, which is this bad boy, I drew a toughness timeline. And you'll see that resilience is the ability to adapt, and it's short to midterm. Endurance is the ability to withstand, and that is medium to long term. And grit, here it comes. Grit is the one we haven't really mentioned yet, but that is the passion and perseverance to go all the way. The long term goal. As Chances got up there right now, I see toughness as being a 3-stage affair where you get used to or you get good at adapting. And then through lots of adaptations, you start to form the pattern that you can withstand multiple adaptations. And then once you get used to enduring the moment, now you get towards grit, which is a much more accumulated level of toughness, because now you understand that over the long haul, perhaps till the end of your life, whatever, man, frickin' bring it. Bring all the problems, bring all the hardships, bring all the struggles. I understand how to adapt. I understand how to withstand. And now I understand that it's just a repetitive, iterative game of getting better at this process while understanding the process. And I think a lot of people struggle with toughness because they don't have a process. They don't understand the timeline. They don't understand how to sequentially increase their sense of toughness. So, with those thoughts in mind, and not listing out all of the various resilience strategies and endurance strategies that I listed out, I'd be curious as to what you guys think.
I This is fantastic. I'm gonna hit Julie first. What do you think?
Wow, of course, you're going to hit me up first. Yeah, that's a lot of information. Uh, I'm glad there's not a lot of math in there, but I like that. That's interesting. I mean, I think for me, breaking it down, the resilience piece, that's that internal dialogue in terms of those negative voices, or can you overcome those and quiet the mind and just get past that? So that's interesting, whether it's something that you're just doing in life or in any kind of competition or challenge that you're doing. And yeah, I mean, the endurance definitely is the bigger piece. So, and Shaun had mentioned, actually, no, I think he mentioned the book Peak Performance, but the other good book is Endure. And so that's another piece of it, which is, the larger section, I think, can you actually endure whatever it is in the long term that you want to achieve, whatever your why is. Are you able to, um, I guess, hang on and look at the end goal and endure whatever challenge that you have to face to achieve that? And then the grit, I mean, that's, one of the things we always talk about, race the grind. That's part of the endurance. But then at the end, like, do you have that little extra 5 or 10% just to get through and push to the end, whether it's getting to the end of the race or getting in the end of whatever it is that you're trying to achieve in life?
Mhm. Yes, really, you're asking yourself, like, how bad do you want it? How bad do you really want it? Aaron, you got any thoughts on any of this?
There we go. Sorry, couldn't find the unmute button. I think a big thing is what we're describing is like a hungry mindset. Like you're hungry for a challenge and you're hungry to test yourself and you're hungry for the opportunity. And you have to really put yourself in that state. And when I left SOF, I found a really, really hard time to give myself something to be hungry for, give myself something that I wanted as a challenge. And I didn't really have too much of a physical why about what I was trying to do or what I was trying to accomplish. And yeah, I think a big thing that worked for me was having like some strong imagery or a strong a song or a strong quote or a phrase, and all that kind of like is my like thing that I look at, listen to, or read that puts me into that hungry mindset that makes me like reinvigorate my why. But yeah, if you don't have that hungry mindset, um, you're not going to go very far because you don't really have anything to go towards. But that's I'm still processing a lot of the question. It's a good topic. I like it.
Yeah, Shaun does this every once in a while where he'll go on a little journey in his descriptions, and then everyone's trying to catch up. I like it. Greg, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, first of all, Shaun, your notepad scribblings are a lot more intellectual than mine ever were, and more legible. But it's interesting, and I would look. I kind of see the resilience and endurance rather than being subsequent stages as running in parallel. And the example that comes to mind would be, traumatic experiences, right? So, for example, early childhood trauma. That's you could say, well, you have to be resilient, but and that is very true, but that's not going to be a short duration effort, right? That's going to be probably a lifelong process of coming back from that, further and further, over time. And so you have to have the endurance along with that resilience, because I do think resilience it's an active state, right? It's not something where it's built into you like a piece of metal where you bend it and it springs back, all done. It's you making that motion happen through continuous intentional effort. And that requires endurance because that's going to be a long, very difficult, often very discouraging and soul crushing experience. Which of course is where the grit comes in, right? Aaron's point of that underlying motivation, the why, right? And when I say motivation, I mean the traditional definition, which is the reason you are doing something, not the feeling of enthusiasm. And so being able to have a clear vision of your motivation, and having ways, which what Aaron said is fantastic, like having ways that you are able to immediately, simply remind yourself of those motivations, whether it's a quote, a song, a phrase, your favorite maxim out of whatever book, to redirect you and kind of get you back on track when that track starts getting very difficult and you look over here and like, oh wow, it'd be a lot easier if I just quit working on this, which is so hard, and I could just watch Netflix for 12 hours a day and forget all of my problems until the rent's due. And so I would see all those things, and I understand exactly what you mean with the phases, but I would also have to somehow put a third dimension on that model where they're running in parallel as well. And that's beyond my mathematical ability. So you have to work on that and bring it back to me next time it's due in the next episode.
Yeah. You need a 3D representation. And I'm actually going to add a fourth in this because it's my personal belief. I mean, resilience and endurance and grit are three massive proponents of toughness. They're the key factors, but I think there's an additional one, at least in my mind, and that is vulnerability. Being able to understand where you're weakest and where you need help or where you need to engage to be tougher. And I'm wondering, in your guys' mind, what role does vulnerability play in being tough, in toughness in general? I'm gonna go with Shaun first on this one. What do you think?
Well, it's not my forte. Vulnerability is still a work in progress, not just for myself, but with others. And so I think it's a valuable point that you bring across, Chance. And I think that, like all things in life, everything is a work in progress as long as you're working towards progress. I'd say that twice so that it sinks in, but hopefully I just have to say it once, because our entire lives will become what we want them to become. And if you don't have a vision towards being tougher, or a vision towards pursuing more excellence, then you are what you are and you'll be what you are right now 10 years from now. And so, as part of my equation, I'd stated toughness equals resilience plus endurance times determination. And so, you can be, as a veteran, as an example, you can be stuck in a moment for the rest of your life while being resilient and being enduring the moment. But until you apply some determination to move beyond where you're at right now, then you're stuck being tough at where you're at. You're not growing your toughness. In fact, I would go so far as to say, take it one step further, that if, as an example, a veteran is relying on some level of toughness from 20 years ago, and they haven't tested that toughness through some determination to see if they actually are that still or not. In other words, proof who you are today versus who you think you are today, as based on a 20-year ago image of self. Determination is mandatory in this equation. It's not enough to have experience. It's not enough to be, to some degree, tough. It is mandatory that you test that. Otherwise, it's a false construct. And so, determination is then on a scale of maybe 1 to 10. What is your determination to see how tough you are in this moment and how you can increase toughness in the future? Well, that comes down to timeline. Do you want to be really tough in 1 year? Do you want to be really tough in 10 years? So you've got a timeline, and your timeline will determine your velocity. And so if someone says to you, hey, listen, I need you to double your output by the end of this month, your velocity is way different than, hey, I need you to increase your abilities by 10% over the next 10 years. Velocities and timelines impact the equation that I kicked out. But at the end of it all, the equation doesn't even exist unless there's determination added to that.
Interesting. Aaron, I'm going to come to you next. What do you think?
Based around vulnerability, I think the best, you got to have the right people around you to be vulnerable, and you have to be comfortable with your community and be humble, and you have to kind of enjoy the ride and kind of laugh at yourself to really be vulnerable and push it to the next step. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about these extreme sports, but I like doing that stuff. So I was doing something I already like to do. And being vulnerable, because I had no problem being vulnerable because I was with all my friends, and I could laugh at myself just like I could be mad at myself for not performing as well as I wanted to. We talked a little bit about reassessing your goals, readapting your lifestyle, and trying not to get stuck living in the past. But based around vulnerability of toughness, I think it's just being comfortable, enjoying it, being having some humility, and just doing like little tricks. Everybody just learns little tricks, and the more you're with different people and you actually are vulnerable and talk to people about stuff, you find little tricks. So my regimental sergeant major, who is like the top of the food chain in CSOR, he actually told me his password was confidence. And I'm like, you're the RSM of the unit. Like, you're like the most confident guy in the world. And he's like, no, I just I remind myself that I'm confident because I type my password in every day, and my password's confidence, and then whatever kind of number afterwards. And it's about having these little tricks, but it's also about having role models. So you are always trying to aspire to something, but if you have a solid role model, like what we talked about with Arnold and the superheroes and other people in your unit and other professional runners, you model yourself after them and you almost pretend you're as tough as those people, and you just start living the life and it starts taking care of itself. Um, but yeah, to do that, you need to be comfortable with who you are, comfortable within your community. You have to be having some sort of fun and being humble and not take everything super serious. And you're vulnerable because you're having fun and you're a little bit more easygoing. And I think that's a bit of a recipe to actually be tough.
I'm liking where this is going. Julie, you got any thoughts on this?
I like that. Yeah, have some fun with it and laugh at yourself because let's face it, no one's perfect and we all make mistakes. So having, laughing at yourself, things are not always going to go as you planned. And then realizing when you have screwed up to ask for help. And as Aaron and, others have mentioned, having a strong community around you and feel comfortable for asking for help. So whether it's a coach or a mentor, or you need to seek other individuals just to be able to ask for help and show that you are open to learning and doing better. um, there was something else I was going to say and I forget. Oh, I know what it was. I like what Aaron said earlier in the show when he said he thought that the toughest people were those that screwed up and that got back into the game. So you see that all the time from a racing perspective. Someone gets injured or they screwed up and had a bad race, but then they've learned from that and then they jump back in, or they've had an injury, or you see that with racing. So I think it does show some vulnerability and toughness once you've had some sort of setback and then you jump in and get back into the game.
Hmm. Yeah, I really like that. Although I did just realize that Aaron gave away the CSOR RSM password live on the internet, but that just kind of dawned on me. Greg, got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, vulnerability is an interesting one, and you definitely need to distinguish between the different types of vulnerability. And very broadly, you have kind of physical, practical vulnerability versus emotional. And so, the physical vulnerability is you walking down the sidewalk in a tough part of town with your eyes closed and headphones on and $50 bills stapled to your shirt. You're very vulnerable, and that's very stupid. There's no benefit to being vulnerable in that sense, right? So you need to be invulnerable in the physical sense, in that you are aware and you are diligently paying attention to what you are doing, where you are, the situational awareness sort of thing. But when it comes to emotional vulnerability, that's what the typical toughness model is missing, right? Is that ability to have deeper interpersonal relationships with the people who are closest to you, and even with strangers. Going back to what Aaron was saying, as a police officer or something, having that empathetic situation with somebody you just met 2 minutes ago doesn't mean you're telling them your passwords, but you are allowing yourself to be vulnerable in the sense that you are showing your human side, which has a lot of emotional aspects to it. And I think the key, though, is the ability to be emotionally vulnerable in a productive way is predicated on security in your identity. In other words, if you know who you are and you are confident in who you are immediately capable of being vulnerable emotionally with other people. And that is how you develop deep, meaningful relationships, right? I feel like I'm on Dr. Phil or something right now, but bear with me for another moment. It's interesting to me because, again, you look at the classic uh, archetypal toughness, and it's the stoic guy who has no relationships, right? Like I don't talk to women. I don't, tell anyone my feelings, and, feelings are weak and all this kind of stuff. That is the ultimate expression of insecurity with who you are, in my opinion, right? And so that is like one of the biggest red flags of the so-called tough guys, is like, the reason you're behaving this way and you're so miserable all the time is because you are one of the most insecure people on earth, and you're not able to have these experiences that are so integral to like successful, fulfilling human experiences. So anyway, figure out who you are and be confident in it and talk to people.
I love it. I love it. It goes exactly into my next question. So we're just going to hit right on it. Is, as someone with extensive physical training, have you found emotional challenges to be more difficult than physical ones? And how do you approach emotional toughness? So I think, at least in my mind, I think you kind of answered that question already, Greg, unless you want to touch on it again. What do you think?
I'll add something really quick, and then I'll
Okay.
try to shut up. My short answer is yes, 100%. I've been doing sports and, outdoor stuff and all that my entire life, and the physical aspect of things has always been the easier part of it for me. Like I'm willing to put my head down and grind myself into absolute dust in order to achieve something, and I enjoy the process to some degree. But the emotional side of things has been the part that I have always had to put extra work into throughout my life. And, I'm in my mid 40s now, and I'm kind of just starting to figure out a lot of these things, or actually accept that I need to do certain things. And something that came to mind earlier, and I can't remember what someone said that made me think of it, is you, if you take someone and you isolate them, right? Whether it is solitary confinement in prison, or it is a solitary wilderness experience for an extended period of time, you will see people absolutely fall apart. And that is the emotional side of things that I think is the least considered, least worked on, and most problematic for the typical human being. Because we have so many things going on. We are all so busy, so distracted. We never actually are in that position of vulnerability where we experience these really deep, kind of primal emotions about, senses of security and meaning, and where do we fit in the universe, and, your familial relationships, and all these sorts of things that we're able to kind of just skate through life without really touching on. And so those kinds of experiences, I'm not saying go get locked in solitary confinement in prison, but having some solitary wilderness experience is a great one for people to find themselves in a position where they are really stripped bare and have to confront these things that are so easy to ignore in everyday life. And you learn strategies to not cope with them in the sense that you were like, I'm going to compartmentalize this even further, 6 more boxes deep. Now we hide that away and chain it up. But how do I finally address this thing? Like, I'm still mad at my dad from when I was 7 years old. What do I need to do about this? That sort of thing. And that is, again, going back to what Aaron said, I think in the very first question, that is such a huge part of toughness, is being willing to recognize, you know, a weakness is a bad word, but that kind of chink in your armor that needs to be shorn up, and being willing to put yourself in that position to experience what is often just horrific discomfort and fear, and say, I am going to address this head on rather than just finding ways to avoid it.
Love it.
And me.
Aaron, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, a big thing for me was for emotional toughness was actually been like family support. So physical toughness, I found that I just like grew through that through training and through my community. But emotional toughness was like probably a little bit harder for me. Right before selection started, I was on base and I was like freaking out. I'm like, man, tomorrow's the day. It's all hell's gonna break loose tomorrow. And I was like in my head and just spinning. And I remember I called my dad. I'm like, hey dad, I'm freaking out. And my dad just laughed at me. He's like, well, you got 2 weeks off work, right? And I'm like, yeah, because I was a reservist at the time. And he's like, all right, sweet. Well, you have nothing else to do with your life for the next 2 weeks, so just go there and have fun. And I was like, yeah, all right, sweet. And so for me, emotional toughness has been like being very comfortable to talk to like my family, my friend support. I definitely talk to God when I need emotional toughness and emotional support. I'll count. I'll self-talk. I'll try to remember my why. I'll listen to that song I told you about. I'll look at that picture that I told you about. I'll read a couple. Like I have a Bible quote that I like a lot, and friend support. And I use all these little tricks to actually be emotionally tough because I don't have that as easily as I probably have physical toughness. So I have to do all this to kind of stay in the game. And I learned how to pull from some of these factors throughout my life and my training so that when I got to a big test, I kind of already had those skills. And but yeah, emotional toughness can shut down. If you're not emotionally tough and emotionally prepared, it can shut down a person that's trained a million hours for their event if they're not ready emotionally or mentally.
Yeah. I think we see this a lot in I didn't say we, but that's not me at all. I've seen on videos or other things about, SEALs going through buds and getting the emotionally weak people who are physically strong get weeded out like immediately. I'm pretty sure you guys probably saw that on selection as well. Julie, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I definitely am of the same mindset as what Aaron and Greg said, that I wouldn't say the physical aspect came easy, but I mean, you put in the work and it doesn't seem as challenging for me as the emotional. So for me, how do I reel in my emotions or rein myself in? Having, some mantras for sure, just having some more quiet time. So I try to do meditation once a day. So just, being quiet in your mind and with your thoughts, doing some yoga. One of my go-tos just for down regulation in the summer with the heat was after every ride, I would go to the river and just soak the legs and get the body temperature down. But also just, it was just peaceful and a way to decompress and let the workload absorb. And sometimes think about, you know, the ride itself and just emotionally reset, I guess you would say, and just unwind and decompress. So those are some of the tools that I've used. And then, as I mentioned before, sometimes just putting yourself into challenging situations that you may face on race day in life, so that if those do come to fruition in a race, that you've encountered those and you know how to handle them and stay calm in the moment.
I love that. I was actually just speaking to one of my jujitsu white belts yesterday. Was, she was tired, was kind of done for the night, and I was like, "You got one more? You got one more? How about one more?" And I was like, the reps now when you're tired and exhausted and want to go home, at least in my mind, those ones count the most, especially for emotional toughness, to be able to push through that last little barrier that you had already put up and like, I'm done. One more? Okay, one more. Let's do it. Shaun, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I do. First of all, I just want to state that Aaron's password is confidence requires vulnerability 1234. That's his password. You'll have to change it now. So my thought is this on the emotional toughness aspect, and I scribbled this down based on what I just heard from the three guests to kind of synthesize it into a single thought, and that is confidence / vulnerability suffers if someone is living in the future. And I know that's not exactly what was said, but I'm proposing that as a problem, because to be vulnerable, you've got to be vulnerable with yourself that you exist as right now, rather than when you're struggling based on who you want to be in the future or who you were in the past. Vulnerability should be based on who you are right now, not the person that you want to be in the future. And so if we're talking athletes, they will struggle today because they're not matching up with what they want to be a year from now. And so that false construct of, well, I'm that almost, but you're not. What you are is who you are right now. And so getting right with that, I believe, takes some real emotional intelligence. But emotional toughness, as we've described toughness, at least from its origination of the word, is strength, resilience, and durability. With emotional toughness, if you're trying to be tenacious with your emotional state right now, then you're kind of denying yourself of the areas that you're actually not tenacious in, or you're not durable in, or you're not strong in. If you're if your emotions are you can get a grip as a stoic on the moment, that doesn't mean that you're emotionally tough. That just means that you have a tool that is helping you deal with the moment in the way that you want to deal with it. But that's not the fullness of all your emotions. So if you're squashing down your sense of joy because you like focusing on misery, or flip-flop that misery for joy, well, now you're only looking at a portion of your emotions, your emotional toughness. So, to take that last sentence, how do you approach emotional toughness? I would deconstruct it and state, how do you approach the areas that you're not emotionally tough?
Let's go around with that one. I'm going to go to Greg. What do you think?
Oh man, I'm still trying to assemble everything after listening to Shaun. And now I'm blanking on what I intended to say when he was in the middle of it. The attacking the weakness is, I think, the key for any of this, right? That's how you get better at anything. And so if you look at the emotional toughness thing as a skill, which I would say is a reasonable description, then you capitalize on the strengths, or excuse me, you exploit the strengths, and then you build up the weaknesses to bring them to the strengths level, right? And that's how you get that complete package, as Shaun is talking about. Um, how exactly you do that, both Aaron and Julie, great strategies. The meditation, or similar practices, where you are learning to feel that calm and control, in the sense that you are not panicking, not trying to control what you think and feel, but experiencing it and just kind of letting it happen. That's a huge part of composure and kind of all around emotional resilience. What Aaron was saying about the self-talk, counting, literally simple things like that, which go hand in hand with the meditation. And so to me, the emotional toughness, the tools and the tactics that work best are very individual, because it's like being hypnotized, right? It only works if you believe it's going to work. So if you're trying some tool, and everything related to emotion, people get very touchy about it, or they don't, they're skeptical. And so if you're trying to force yourself to employ a method or a tool that you are saying, oh, this is silly, of course it's not going to work, right? And so you can't just bang yourself over the head with a hammer, so to speak, trying to force yourself to accept something that you have this deep-seated belief will not work. So it takes experimentation, and all of these things take practice. No one tries to meditate on day one and is the little Buddha, right? They're panicking and they're thinking of their grocery list and all these different things. And is my kid going to graduate from high school? It takes practice. So I don't mean to dissuade people from trying things, because they don't instantly work perfectly. But if you have this like constitutional aversion to something, that's probably not a good one to start with. That's, I guess, my last thoughts on that.
Love it. Julie, any thoughts?
Just the one piece that Shaun had mentioned about athletes and looking into the future. So that is a big thing, whether it's has to do with a race or something that you're dealing with in life, is that you have to try to bring yourself back into the present moment. So whatever that looks like, maybe you have to take a deep breath or slow your breathing down and look at what's in front of you and what do you have to address at this moment to get through the challenge, whether it's if you're on some challenging terrain on your bike and you have to take a moment, a deep breath before you start the technical descent, or you're going into a meeting and you need to take a couple deep breaths, or just come back to knowing that you're ready for whatever the moment is. And in terms of racing, just to be prepared, I always kind of said you want to race your strength and train your weaknesses. So whatever that is, whether it's emotional or physical, just address what that is and how you can get through and be tough.
Love it. This is fantastic. There's so much good information has come out of today's conversation. This is awesome. Aaron, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I think, Shaun, the biggest thing for me is there's really so much information out there. Like, we're in 2024, you have access to so much good information, but so much kind of like average, not so good information. But if you're learning something and you want to talk about how can I be tougher in this kind of one avenue, the biggest thing I've always done and always said to people is go figure out who the best is at it and start learning from that person. And I mean, you could go on ChatGPT and say, who's the best person at this? Or what's the leading scientist say about this? Or what does the stats say about that? And then dive into it. I mean, you can learn through YouTube, you can learn through self reading, self reflection. But I think you have to have that learning persona, that learning mindset, and that goes back into being humble because you realize you don't know everything.
Could not agree more with that one. Now, we are just about at 2 hours now, and I think that's a really good spot to clean up. What do you got, Shaun?
Just to wrap up what Aaron said, to point the finger at the panel, he's right. Aaron is right. If you're looking for ideas or ways to do it better, you have to identify who's doing it the best. And so maybe not the number one person in the world or number two, maybe the number 10, whoever you've got access to, who's doing it best in the world, gain access to them. And so again, as I look at this panel, every single guest is world class in their own respective genre. They've been there and done that at a world class level. And so if anyone out there is looking for physiological, psychological, emotional ways to do life better, identify or get around people who have done it at a world level. It's fun to talk to your neighbor across the fence who's really good at mowing the lawn if you want to learn how to mow a lawn. But if you want to learn how to kick ass, maybe a neighbor can teach you, but chances are there's people who've done it better than your neighbor, and it's your job to identify them. And so I'll listen to anyone, but I don't form strong opinions based on what my neighbor thinks 24-hour solo mountain bike racing is all about. And if I need to lift, if I need to do whatever, I've got people in my life who I've already pre-identified as a solution for me. And I think that's the way we're supposed to do things in life, is not just bumble our way through and hope that we bump into peers with good experiences or subject matter experts, if you will. We're supposed to pre-identify them and hope that in the near future, we can spend time with them. That's just a thought.
I'm liking this. This is fantastic. I really believe that, especially when you can pinpoint someone. And actually earlier, Greg, you had said growing up, the people that we would look up to, because I think you and I are about the same age, the Schwarzeneggers, the Stallones, the the 80s action hero, that gives, especially a young boy, it gives us something to shoot for. It gives us something to aim at, and then you can start working towards that. And as I've gotten older, I've had to learn how to be more emotionally tough. I've had to learn how to be more emotionally vulnerable. The physical side, I think, also felt pretty easy once we got into it. But that is a fantastic points. I cannot thank you guys enough for this conversation. It has been absolutely outstanding. So Aaron, Greg, Julie, Shaun, thank you guys. This is awesome. Let's get some final thoughts and then we can shut her down for the afternoon. Aaron, you're on top. Last final thoughts. Anything left brewing in the back of the brain there?
Great experience. I learned a lot today. Hopefully somebody learned a thing or two from me, but yeah, I feel like I gained as much as I talked. So thanks everybody for your contributions.
This is the benefit of the collective. We all get to learn from everybody. I love it. Greg, any final thoughts? He's muted right now. Your computer's all done. All right. Julie, any final thoughts at all?
I don't know if you can see this shirt or not, but I was like, well, what am I going to wear today? So many t-shirts. And then I picked this one and I thought this just sort of was like, yeah, this is what I think about toughness. Like you've put in the work, you've done the hard work, and this is, here we go. I'm good to go. So yeah.
Love it. Shaun, any final thoughts?
That's good. Toughness, yeah. I think that I'm going to default back to a pretty simple statement, and that is no matter how tough you think you are, you're only as tough as the experiences in life that you've faced and solved, and then gone on to use for the rest of your life. It's not a one and done. Toughness isn't a one and done thing. Every one and done tough moment that you figure out gets stacked on all the other one and done tough moments until you've got a body of work that you can rely on. Once you're in a position where you can look backwards and reflect on all of the tough moments you solved, that should put you in a position of confidence that you can take care of anything in the future. Know that you've done it before so that you know you can do it again. And if you're struggling with that idea, if you've lost a little bit of your confidence in your way, then get around people who will encourage you to dial up the rotary dial enough so that you're back in the game of being confident as to what you've done in the past. What we've done and what we will do, that's generally how the human existence operates. Very rarely do we exist in the moment. We're in the past or we're in the future. So think about those 3 time states. If you were tough in the past, are you tough now? Or are you thinking about how to be tough in the future? I'll leave it at that.
Bam. I got nothing to add. I'm just gonna sign us out with the same thing we always do. Continue to learn, build, and grow with all ranges of toughness. We'll see you all next week. Chimo.